Welcome to GTM Confessions, where we share what it takes to be a go-to-market professional today. Because it's freaking hard, and it's far from the glamorous picture that social media often paints. Consider this show your weekly go-to-market therapy session. I'm your host, Stephanie Cox. I have more than 20 years of experience, and I've done almost everything go-to-market related in my career. In this episode, I chat with Kara Smith-Brown, CEO at Lead Coverage, about why companies struggle with their go-to-market strategy, the importance of having an ideal customer profile that looks like your existing customers, how to effectively use intent data, and so much more. Welcome to the show, Kara.
Thanks for having me.
So there is so much I want to talk to you about today, and we'll get to your book at some point as well. But one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show was you are just a badass in general as a CEO, a marketing executive, and I think have a really unique perspective on how to think about go-to-market strategy, intent data, what's working, what's not working. And I know when I first met you years ago, virtually in a CEO Pavilion group, I was super impressed. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you on the show today. I think there's so much people can learn from you. But maybe let's level set, because I think you really think about go-to-market so differently and compared to how other people talk about it. So for you, what does an effective go-to-market strategy look like for a business?
Yeah, it's so interesting. So thank you for having me on. I serve a very specific vertical. So important for your audience to understand. I serve only the supply chain market, which most of your listeners are like, I'm out. Like I don't care, right? Like trucks, planes, boats, right? But let me give you some understanding of the market. It's a $2 trillion market here just in the States. We opened an office in the UK to serve another $2 trillion market, which is the UK and EMEA. And we think of the supply chain as the physical movement of goods, the tech that moves the goods, which is a nice, cool, 20 or $30 billion market, and then the money that moves the goods. So our very specific ideal customer profile is really only in this one segment. So the question about go-to-market for me is really specific to my market, my ideal customer profile, which is logistics and supply chain. So for us, go-to-market is the combination of the sales and marketing approach that they're taking to market together. And historically, the supply chain ecosystem has been, the kind word is a laggard on the adoption of most of the best practices, which is where your customers and your listeners are probably listening to, which is really the SaaS space. So we live at this really interesting connection between what are the best practices happening in SaaS, and how do we bring those best practices into the supply chain ecosystem. And we're trying really hard as a small team, right, against this $2 trillion behemoth market.
How often do you find change management to be a fundamental problem? Because, as you said, they are laggards in adopting new technology or new strategies, and you've got to get some people on board that have been doing the same thing for probably decades and are resistant to change.
It is 100% of the time a challenge. There are very, very few, although I shouldn't say that. The startups in the space that are coming in and trying to disrupt, AI is really hot right now in supply chains. We've got a bunch of startups and smaller businesses that are younger, newer, right? But you're right. There are some, actually, I'll tell you a funny story. We are right now in the middle of, we are a HubSpot top tier shop. I don't know, diamond, platinum, whatever it is. So we're the HubSpot shop for supply chain. So when HubSpot gets a really big deal, they call us to do the integration. And so we are right now in the process of pitching a $4 billion company with a B. They are global and they do not have a CRM. This knocks the socks off of just about either, right? Like anyone like literally, how do you get that big without a CRM? And they are currently sending emails through MailChimp. Like, I know the shock on your face is like exactly. So if you're not from supply chain, like you don't understand like just what we're sort of up against. And so the answer to your question is yes, change management is an enormous piece of what we deal with every day, all day. But something really interesting happened from a macro perspective, a macroeconomic perspective to our space. So in 2019, we were chugging along, doing kind of the same stuff we'd always done, dialing for dollars, using kind of antiquated tech. VC and PE had kind of forgotten about supply chain. It wasn't super interesting, right? And then the pandemic hit, and we, Lead Coverage, my business, grew 121% overnight. All of my customers made an outrageous amount of money, but instead of selling, we started taking orders. So when your toilet paper and your paper towel were late, that shipper called my customer and said, I just need it as fast as possible because Stephanie doesn't have toilet paper, right? And so they started taking orders instead of selling. And so when the economy sort of hit a brick wall in 2023, my customers were like, wait a minute, now we have to sell again. And the sales motion had atrophied, just like anything else, right? Going to the gym. So the sales motion inside most of my customers had kind of declined. And so now we're still to this day in 25, like trying to restart the sales motion. And what they're noticing, folks in my space, is that, oh, there's all these cool tools that we can add now. And younger people are coming in to lead, and a lot of them have some PTSD experiences from the last 18 months. And so they're looking around saying, how are we going to change our go-to-market strategy? Because what worked in 2019 is not working in 25. And we didn't really do a lot of changing between 20 and 2023.
Or was just surviving during those 3 years, I feel like.
Yeah, the short answer is yes. The longer answer is in my space, they were surviving and thriving, right? Like they made so much money. Um, but they were surviving and they were hiring and they were growing like crazy. And it was just, piled on top. And then all of a sudden it just came to a screeching halt. And so it's been kind of a whiplash for our space for sure. 23 and 24, end of 23, early 24 was pretty rough. And we're starting to see rebounds in the truckload market. So we're starting to see folks come back.
Who do you find needs to be at the table when you start crafting it like a go-to-market strategy to help these companies think strategically about the way they should sell in 2025 and beyond?
Yeah, you have to have sales buy-in. There's no chance that this works without sales buy-in. And the other thing that we think that there are three sort of key strategies that work in supply chain. They are strategies that I have blatantly stolen from my friends in SaaS. So this is nothing new for some of your folks, but very new for us. One is really planting the flag and deciding that you are the expert on one thing, with some great examples of that. Two is intent data. This introduction of account-based marketing, intent data, and programmatic media buying into the supply chain market is like blowing people's minds. So we are introducing 6sense and Rollworks and some other options to this marketplace, and they're kind of freaking out, which is really cool. And then lastly is partnerships, which the SaaS ecosystem is really used to this partnership ecosystem, right? So there are these three strategies working in supply chain, and we're bringing them in, right? But to your point, if you don't have the leadership buy-in and you don't have the sales team saying, yes, this is going to work, the marketing teams at these supply chain companies are always underfunded. I mean, it's a $4 billion company with no CRM. They're not even on HubSpot, like let alone like using intent data to like have a lead score, right? Like, and so that's usually what we're dealing with are heavy sales orgs with very little go-to-market or marketing support, and a lot of times marketing, with the air quotes, to the leaders of these supply chain companies is a girl like me in my 20s, right? Who was like making they still today call them tear sheets, making tear sheets and like
Made those.
yeah, me
Lots of
too.
them.
Yeah. Yeah. Making tear sheets and like social media posts, and they don't understand the value. So we do a lot of education, but the education actually, like we literally wrote the book, like we wrote an actual book on it so that now if you read it, which sometimes people do, and then they come into me and they're like, "Hey, I read your book and now I understand." I'm like, "Oh, it's so great," right? So the tide is changing, but it's a little bit like turning the Titanic.
I can imagine. I've worked a lot in software, but with manufacturers, and very similar. They're very slow moving. They have very antiquated ways. They still love paper. They love it. They don't want to let it go. They want to shake hands. They like business cards, and digital is scary to them. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to manufacturers that don't have a CRM and they're like, well, it's an Excel. And I'm like, on your computer,
You're
on
what?
your computer. That is not helpful to
Not even a
it
Google sheet.
literally,
It's not even a
right?
Google sheet. Yeah.
Well, Google Sheets can be very confusing sometimes as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Um, so thinking about, I know you talk in your book about like measurements, and I've heard you say that you wish that that would have been like an earlier chapter.
Yes.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about why measurement is so important in evaluating go-to-market strategies and what are kind of those key measurements you would tell people you have to pay attention to first.
Yeah, so the book that I wrote, it's called The Revenue Engine. I flashed it here on the screen. It's an Amazon bestseller. I couldn't believe it when it happened because it's really written for the supply chain community. It's 60,000 words on supply chain go-to-market, and if you had told me it would be an Amazon bestseller, I'd be like, you're full of it. There's no way, but it is. So surprise and delight. The last third of the book is the third that's written on measurement. So it's three big pieces. It's a 9-step process. The first is share good news, track interest, follow up, which is in a tactical. The second is really the 3 funnels, which is really about measuring your CRM, what's in your CRM. And then the third is measurement. We talk about measuring volume, velocity, and value. And to your audience and folks in SaaS and people that are in marketing and go to market, everyone's like, uh-huh. Like, yep, that's, table stakes, and you would be
But you
amazed.
would
And
also be surprised how many people in SaaS don't understand that.
cool. Well, great. Maybe my experience in SaaS is just smart people like you. Maybe there are people I haven't met that need help. I don't know. Um, and the volume is like, so we tell people 1 volume, 1 velocity, and 1 value metric. So start small, right? And then there's a little chart in the book, and we kind of turn it into volume, velocity, value, and then, marketing, share good news, track interest, follow up. And so we do things like, in the book we don't talk a lot about impressions, like press impressions, or we don't do a lot on like Google Analytics. It's just not what we spend our time on. But how do you show ROI against the go-to-market framework inside of the volume, velocity, and value matrix? So it's pretty cool. And I tell people, hey, like just start here, like pick one. The other piece of advice I share is to pick one and stick with it for a minute, right? I think a lot of times leadership teams have a tendency to say, okay, show me more. Or my favorite is double click into that. And it's like, for what? Like, why would I like, I'm showing you the math. You don't need to know what's behind it. Like, you're not going to understand it anyway. But, so do one at a time, volume, velocity, value, and then start to add to it over time. And you'll end up with, some pretty cool leading indicators that can tell you what's working and what's not. So for your listeners and watchers, like volume is literally what is in the pipeline and what is in the marketing funnel. So we call the funnel marketing and pipeline is sales. So what is in each of those? 2 is value. And really it's just a multiplication equation, right? Which is your ideal customer profile, ARR or LTV, we're agnostic, we don't care which one, multiplied by the volume, right? Like it's really pretty easy. And then velocity is the one that trips people up. Velocity can be a little wonky because it's really the measurement of time. And if you don't have a CRM, if you are using spreadsheets or Google Docs, you don't have timestamps. And so the real value for us, besides kind of the Rolodex nature of a CRM, is understanding velocity. So it's the most complicated of the 3. But if you can start with volume and value and get 1 velocity, maybe it's just how long it takes you to go from first touch to SQL or SQL to the end of the cycle, right? Like figure 1 velocity out that matters to you. That's a good place to start.
Do you see companies, once they start putting these metrics in place, going to kind of your point earlier, let's measure everything, let's double click into that? Because I've fallen victim to that, where it's like, well, I have all this data, let's look at all of it on a dashboard. And it's almost like overpowering and useless. So, how do you help people understand the value of data, but also prevent them from going hog wild and wanting to measure everything with zero purpose besides we can?
Yeah. We spend a lot of time, what Blair Enns calls, he's one of my favorite authors, calls maintaining the expert position. We spend a lot of time on this. Like, we say no to our customers, which is sometimes kind of awkward. It's a funny story. So we had someone tell me a couple weeks ago, in your SOW, I would like you to write 2 blog posts a month. And I said, okay. Do you have blog posts now that are driving revenue that I'm unaware of? And she was like, no, but we just think we should have them. I was like, okay, well, we know that they don't drive revenue. So how about you write them? You can ChatGPT this now, it doesn't take long. We'll edit them and put them up for you. But we're going to spend time on stuff that drives revenue. So oftentimes when we get into this, like, show me how it's made, more math, more math, more math, we will remind clients, Lead Coverage, my business, is in the business of generating revenue. Every hour that we spend not generating revenue is an opportunity cost hour. So instead of double clicking on your math and sending you, 50,000 versions of the same math, we're going to show you what you need to know, and then we're going to go do stuff that generates revenue. That usually lets people kind of settle a little, and then asking why, and having the cojones to ask why. I think a lot of times service providers, or people that have customers, right, tend to end up in the vendor position because they want to be able to deliver whatever their customer wants, because we have this idea that the customer is always right. But the customer isn't always right. Like, sometimes you have to guide them towards, like, hey, this, whatever number that you think is impactful here, this isn't actually what we should be measuring, or it's not as important as this other number. So we spend a lot of time on that.
So, if you come into, let's say, a new company that's going to work with you, how do you evaluate what they're currently doing and determine where there are immediate opportunities for improvement?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We're actually working through that right now. We are kind of rethinking about our intake form and how we identify lowest hanging fruit. And it's an interesting conundrum because sometimes what we think is important is not what the customer thinks is important. So, back to my example of the 2 blog posts, it is much more important to me that I get the ideal customer profile and the list of potential customers correct, right? That we spend, and what sometimes can feel like an inordinate amount of time, getting that list right. And if the customer doesn't understand that the list is actually more important than the blog posts, and the blog posts are more important to them, then we end up kind of in a weird situation. So, we're trying to do a better job of understanding what is important to the customer, the human being, the customer, when it comes to, like, their expectations. Um, and it's dramatically different enterprise to startup. So we have lots of opportunity. We have big enterprise clients, like really, really big, sexy logos. Um, and we're doing really cool, sexy, interesting projects with them inside of our retainer. And the startups are just a different beast, if that makes sense. So
It does.
yeah. So I really hate the answer. Every customer is different, because at the end of the day, they're not, right? Like, the models and the approaches that we wrote in here apply whether you're a publicly traded multi-billion dollar company or a startup. Like, it's all the same stuff. It's just volume and scale. So trying to communicate that to someone, but a lot of times we find, and I'm sure you guys find this too, like, you just find people that think they know what they want and they say, I just want this one thing. And then you're kind of immediately in this vendor position, and you can't get out of it once you're in it.
Well, I think your comment around the blog post is so spot on because I think a lot of marketers and go-to-market leaders were raised in this whole idea of like content production. I need to create things and publish things to show that I'm driving value, even if no one looks at it or no one does it. Because I often challenge companies when they're like, "Well, we got to post more on social media." I'm like, but do
Do
you?
you? Do
Do
you?
you? You don't even like your own company's posts. Like, why are you expecting your customers to do it or
Well,
your
and
prospects?
are your posts driving revenue? If they are not, do you think they're going to drive revenue? Like, what would lead you to the impression that they are driving? Are they driving revenue for someone else? Like, is there a strategy that I don't know about that we should be talking about? Like, and I think that's the expert position, right? Is you have to be able to sit back and say, hey, like for us, like we can say we literally wrote the book on this. So if you don't want to follow the methodology of the book, then don't hire us. But we're not going to just say yes because you want meta descriptions, because they will not drive revenue. They just won't.
So, thinking about companies that struggle and fail with their go-to-market strategy, what are the commonalities that you see there besides obviously spending time on things that don't drive revenue?
Yeah, that's probably the top one. Two is ideal customer profile, is really trying hard to execute against a wish list and not driving towards your actual current customers, right? So you have current customers, repeat your current customers. Don't try to wish list your way out of whatever situation you're in. Those are the top two. And then lastly is follow up. I have a great little story I can share. So we were working for this nice little company in the middle of the Midwest. They will remain nameless. And they were unhappy with us because nothing had closed, right? And so I was like, okay, well, like what's going on? Like, let me dig in. So I dug in and we had delivered 45 qualified opportunities. And I'm talking like qualified, Stephanie. So we are down to like my team will make the first dial against someone who comes in and says, I'm interested. So we are making dials, setting meetings. Okay. 45 of these in like 60 days. Like it was really fast. So I drove my butt out to middle of nowhere and I'm sitting in this meeting and I said, well, what's happening when they're delivered to you? Because we are using HubSpot, you're using Salesforce. We're kind of delivering them, like we're kind of dropping them on you. It's not my favorite thing, but we're kind of dropping them on you. What's happening? And the sales guy told me, well, I call them twice.
And then that's it, right?
Twice.
Yeah.
And I was like, twice? Like, what if they're in the bathroom? What if they are on vacation? Like, what if they're in a car accident? Like, twice? These are people that have reached out and said we're interested. You've spent a lot of money getting me to get these people to say yes, right? And so, like, how do we get the follow-up to be just as good as the delivery of the services, right? So that's yeah, those are the three things. One is who is the ideal customer profile, super clear. Two is not doing things that don't drive revenue, like stay the course. And then three is great follow-up, just really great follow-up, you know?
I think that one is so important because I feel like that is a massive issue with every single sales reps, except if you ever need to buy a home or like refinance your home, they
Yeah.
never stop calling you.
But
But
they keep calling you because it works. Like those businesses would not do that much follow-up if they weren't closing some percentage of the people that they bother all the time, right? So, you know, there's a business in supply chain called TQL and they're not a client. I don't know anything. I don't know any of them at all, but they have a reputation for being the most aggressive. Like if you get on a TQL guy's call sheet, you're going to have to send a cease and desist letter to get the guy away. You know what I mean? And I have so much respect for that, actually. Like I have like a lot of respect for like that level of tenacity. And if you don't, especially in our space in supply chain, like if you're not as tenacious as the guys at TQL, like they'll eat your lunch.
well, and I think it's interesting because what you're talking about in the example you gave was hand raisers, people who said like, I'm
Yes.
interested. So it's not even like you're cold calling someone who never raised a hand. If someone says they're interested, like you need to politely chase them down.
Yes. You and I are saying exactly the same thing. There is a there's a interesting thing on the team happening on my team where we're having a lively debate, a bunch of marketers, right? On do we need a form fill or can we get enough third party intent signals that the lead score is tripped, right? And my opinion is, well, the lead score is artificial. Like we make up the lead score. So like if we're gonna like use the lead score, it needs to be like super high. Like the threshold for us reaching out needs to be like basically they've done everything but fill out a form. But if you have filled out a form, if you have given my team a name and an email address, my expectation is that you are chased until you like call the cops. Like just we spend so much energy, time, and money getting in front of these people. And if we've done it correctly and we have a very clear ideal customer profile and we've been putting executive thought leadership and meaningful content in front of them and it's worked and they've given us their information, like that should be enough to get someone on the phone, right? Like you've shown it.
Why do you think sales is so quick? Not every salesperson, I don't want to knock all of them, but so many of them are so quick to make the two calls and then stop. Because I see the same thing happen in pipeline where you have deals that are active in pipeline and they stall. And I'm like, when's the last time you talked to them? Well, I sent them an email like 6 weeks ago. Cool. Well, I got like 700 emails
Right.
today.
That's true.
So great. I'm sure they saw it, thought about it, and they're just waiting to respond to you.
I don't know. Like I consider myself a sales guy, right? Like I'm a salesperson first. And I think, my gut is it's easier to that we as humans just do the easiest thing in front of us, right? And so if there's anything else to do, they'll do that first before they make that awkward phone call, right? And then I think the other piece is leadership. Leadership has got to set expectations on how many times we're going to drive, what we're going to say, how many times we're going to say it, what the expectation is. And I think I see a lot of anemic sales leaders, a lot of anemic sales leaders that do not hold the sales team accountable. They're not doing regular checks. They're not doing, regular check-ins, not just of pipeline, but of funnel, right? And so we see a lot of that. We see a lot of, and the sales leader allowing deals to stay in the pipeline for much, much longer than they should. Actually, I had a meeting this week, and we sat down in the meeting, and the sales leader said to me, "Well, our sales closing velocity is very slow. Our time to close is very slow. Our sales cycle is over a year." And I said, "Oh, that's really interesting because I've worked for your direct competitor and their sales cycle is 3 months." So, is it really a year, or have you just been allowed to languish on these deals for a year and no one on your leadership team has challenged it? What's the real answer? And sometimes it's, a little bit of each, but I think a lot of times people are just not willing to ask the hard questions internally, and like really be
Well,
honest about what's going on.
no, I agree because I'm like cutthroat when it comes to pipeline. I'm like, is this a real opportunity? Or are you keeping it in here on the chance that it might close the next 6 to 9 months because you don't want your pipeline to look like shit?
Right.
And I think there's a lot of people that do that because it does hurt to go through it and axe out stuff that's no longer real. It doesn't mean that it's not, like, as you're talking about, maybe back in funnel, but it's not pipeline anymore. It's not something that you can actively work and get to a close anytime soon.
Right. And I think there's also a component, and we're guilty of this too, of like closing the wrong deal, chasing the deal because it's easy, something that you just know isn't the right fit, etc. And those are just all hard conversations. And nobody wants to have a hard conversation. Hard conversations are ugly. They make us uncomfortable, right? And hard conversations are part of the job.
Well, and that's one of the things you said earlier about, having nailing down your ICP list and it not being a wish list. I feel like maybe was it like 15, 20 years ago, this idea of whale hunting became really popular. Like you go whale hunt these big customers. Like I remember going to trainings on it. And all I think about now is why did we ever think that was a good idea? Why did we think it was a great idea to go chase these behemoth companies that look nothing like our current customer base? Waste a ton of time and resources on it and be surprised when half of them don't close, or when they do close, we can't deliver what they need because, spoiler alert, we don't do that.
And the opposite is also true. I mean, full transparency, I'm probably being too transparent more transparent than I should. We are really great at servicing enterprise customers. We crush it when you spend enough money that we can put enough resources on your account to be good at what we do. We opened up a group of customers the beginning of the year. It was a long story. We kind of did some pirating, and they're not paying us. It's an accelerator model, so they're paying us less money, right? So we have less time to spend on them because we're consultants. And what we're finding is like they're more demanding. They're, they all like and so the switch of the model is really painful. So it's the same on both ends, right? Like whale hunting is dangerous and like squirrel hunting is dangerous. Like you just need like a nice deer, like right in the middle, you know what I mean? Like something right in the middle, like right in my sweet spot, easy to spot, right? We'll sometimes jump in front of a car. Like you just
looks like the other deers.
Yeah, exactly. They all look the same. I actually kind of love this. Maybe I'll write a podcast about, or a blog post about it. Like know your deer, right? Like eventually we live kind of in the country. They run in front of my car all the time. Like if I just show up in the world, in the marketplace, I will run into a bunch of deer, right? Less likely whales in my life, right? And so the whole point is exactly what you and I are saying, the same thing. Like, yes, like stick to exactly what you know how to do.
Well, and there are a lot of deers out there.
Yeah.
If anyone's not familiar and has never lived in the country, there are a lot of deers, which is a great analogy for there's a lot of other companies that look like your current customers. Go after them.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. I like that analogy a lot.
So let's talk about intent data. I know you're really passionate about it. So maybe let's kind of like level set on how you would best define what intent data is. Because I know it's a hot take.
Can I tell you the story? Okay. So I use the story. It's in the book. I tell people this all the time. I did it on stage. I hope people steal it. So here's the story that I use to share with now remember my audience. My audience are men that run supply chain companies, right? So they're listening to this woman talk about intent data. So what I tell them is in 2026, November 2026, so we're going forward in time, Tim Cook gets on stage and he's doing his normal Apple update and he drops a bomb, right? Total bomb, drops a bomb. And he says, Apple is insourcing our supply chain by 2030, which to you, Stephanie, probably not a big deal, but to UPS, FedEx, Geodis, like the whole list, I say all the acronyms, right? All of the people who support the Apple ecosystem are freaking out, right? And these CEOs are turning to their global account managers or their chief commercial officers, and they're saying, how did we not know? Are we on the list to help them insource, right? This is a huge project. How, like, et cetera, et cetera. And that decision, Tim Cook does not get on stage that morning having been like, I think I'll blow up all my supply chain vendors today. Like, that's not how it happens. There's a tiger team in Cupertino that today are searching for Gartner Magic Quadrants on TMS, WMS, OMS. They're researching how to buy a fleet, truckload versus LTL, hub and spoke model, all the things, right? Those are the intent cues. So we are looking for not just the Google searches, but the research that's happening that gives us a signal that something's going to happen. Now, we have no idea if Apple's actually going to insource their supply chain. I have no insider knowledge, but like we can probably guess based on these cues or these clues that something is changing inside the supply chain. So this happens, we have a customer that's inside the four walls and someone is looking for robots. Someone buying a robot for a warehouse, it's pretty indicative something's changing, right? Or they're putting up their own warehouse, something is changing. So you're looking for the flexion point in their business that isn't necessarily going to be on stage. And if you wait until after the earnings report comes out, or if you wait until after Tim Cook is on stage and announces it, it's over, right? Like, and you're going to be competing with the other 2,000 companies that are all approaching Apple after they make the announcement. So I like to use my example of intent data is the searches that are happening in Cupertino today is the intent data that we need to get in front of to look for the clues that something is changing.
What do you think the biggest misconceptions are about using intent data or the misconceptions about what it is that's kind of make people leery of it?
So we have European customers that are uncomfortable with the privacy issues. And what I say to them is, listen, it's not my software, right? Like, if I built this software, I would be in a very different room, having a very different life, right? We are super users of the software, but I can tell, we can set you up with the software vendor to talk about legal compliance and things like that. So that's one issue. The other is the cost. It's just really expensive to do it well. And you have to have a shocking amount of content to do it in an appropriate way. And so people kind of push back on like, how do I get started? And there is sort of a get started point, which is your primary intent data. I had a wonderful conversation this week. I was at a very sexy trade show. ProMat is the warehouse automation show in Chicago. It's I must have done 40,000 steps. It's like the biggest show in the world. It's enormous. It's like CES. It's huge, but it's just robots. It's, robots and warehouse stuff. And I talked to a gentleman there, and long story short, he said to me, well, I used to work at IBM and we had 6sense, and we were unconvinced that the third party data from 6sense was any better than our first party data. And I said, well, yeah, you were working for IBM. Like, I would expect that your first party data would be pretty great because nobody gets fired for buying IBM. Like, what? But now you work for this small business and no one is searching for your tiny company. So how do you use the third party signals for other people's companies to tell you there's a signal that they might buy? So how do you use the IBM primary intent signals to drive who might be buying your little company? So it's really interesting because I was telling him some of the case studies that we have, and he was like, okay, so now I see how this works. And I thought to myself, like, don't hire people from IBM. Like, just because the assumption that if it doesn't work in enterprise, it's not going to work for mid-market is kind of silly. And so that's the other pushback we get. And then lastly is the misapplication of the tool. So we have customers that have maybe heard me talk about it, or they have a friend that used it and they try it and they're like, well, it didn't work for us. Usually it's a misapplication of the tool, or they don't know their ideal customer profile. And so they were trying to listen to too much of the market. Or they bought what they thought was 6sense programmatic media buying, and they really bought like a cheap version and they wanted more out of the tool than they could really get. And so there's lots of problems, right? Or the last piece is they think their ideal customer profile is enterprise, but their ideal customer profile is actually lowered mid-market, where intent signals and tools like 6sense Demandbase just don't work. And so if you're all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, if your ideal customer profile is incorrect, you may buy the wrong tech because you think you're going after Walmart and Apple, but you really need to get in front of, I don't know, Bandolier, which is a lovely little business, but not an enterprise as big as, IBM.
So if someone wants to get started with intent data, I know you mentioned you have to have an obscene amount of content. How do they think about going about that? And what does that typically look like? Because one of the challenges I've seen is sometimes people think well, get intent data and like the opportunities will just start like magically rolling in somehow. It doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work like that. No. And so we try not to take a stair-step approach. Like, we try to go all in because stair-stepping into a strategy like this just disappoints everyone along the way. But there are some tools like the tool Enrich, the letter N, the word rich is a pretty good stepping stone, right? So we have a client that was on Enrich for a while and we recommended 6sense and they're a lot happier with the 6sense tool, but they got enough value out of Enrich to see the value of Intent. Same with Rollworks or Terminus, right? So you can kind of stair step into a little bit. I think the biggest question, now that you asked the question that way, is investment. Are you really ready to invest the kind of money it takes to really do Intent right? You know, the tool's 150 grand. The team to do it isn't, they're not cheap, right? The people to put these tools in place are really expensive. The volume of content you need to do it is a lot. And so, you really need to, the leadership really needs to ask themselves, like, do we have the sort of capital to infuse this? Um, we've been brought in actually by private equity groups to do it. And the PE group will pay for us and for the software because they're so bullish on it, where the operators themselves are just kind of, they don't understand the value. It's been really interesting. We're like right at the kind of beginning of this journey.
The other thing I'd add to your list of things that you need is patience. I feel like companies need a lot of patience. They all want to go fast and they want these instantaneous results, and it things take time. And they've, at least I've found when implementing Intent, one of the things that people forget is it's like you were saying in your example of Apple, it's like the early signals
Right.
that you're going to get in that conversation. Like you still have, while they're making a decision to change the strategy, and then the sales process time that you typically would have right before a deal would close.
Right.
So it's like people forget that.
And we have to remind people a lot, clients a lot. Like these are clues. Intent data will not tell you, you know, Apple is outsourcing their supply chain and Tim Cook is going to announce it on November 26th. Like, that's not how it works. I tell this story as a fictional, like, you know, way to explain the tool, but sometimes I think people take it seriously and they're like, "Oh, so you know this." I'm like, "No, I don't have any idea this is really going to happen." But like it's an iterative process. And I think the other piece, we have a really cool story that we tell, because it actually happened where there was a partnership. It's a long story. I won't go through the whole thing, but the signals showed us something was changing. So we did a PR piece on what was surging. And that PR piece we can see drove meaningful movement in the pipeline. So I think sometimes if your go-to-market teams are not connected, and what I mean by that is all the way down to the PR team, right? And if you're not using the signals from the Intent tool to drive not just the sales process, but to drive in thought leadership, product innovation, cross-sell, upsell opportunity, current customer retention, like there's so much that can be done with the Intent tool. And if it languishes inside the sales org, very specifically with the BDR function of the sales org, the opportunity cost is so high because these tools are so expensive and there's so much amazing data inside the orchestrations that you're building. And I think a lot of times we see clients kind of using it in this really tiny siloed way. And when you expand the use of the Intent signals across the org, you can really see some super cool benefits.
Well, let's talk thought leadership. So I know that's something that content's a really big important piece of a go-to-market strategy. How do you typically talk to companies about incorporating thought leadership in their go-to-market strategy? How do you think about it in your own go-to-market strategy too?
So we hyper focus on market specific. There's two kind of thought leadership paths. One is market specific and kind of macroeconomic. So we have a customer, a bunch of their work is in steel. So we built a steel index, right? And so there's an index on steel. Another customer, they have been putting out a cross-border index. So Mexico to US freight and back since 2020. And maybe you know this, maybe you don't. There's been a macroeconomic shift from Southeast Asia to Mexico, and so cross borders gone through the roof, and it's really cool. And so they were on the front end of that because of this thought leadership. So one is like planting the flag, owning a couple of things. Three-ish is great that you are the best at, and you're going to plant it. And for my very specific market and supply chain, a lot of times people say it's our people, it's our people, it's our service, and I'm like, that is actually not. You cannot plant a flag on service. It has to be on something specific that solves their problem. Your people don't count. So that's kind of a hard conversation to have. Two is having a point of view on something that no one else has. So we went hardcore, lead coverage, went hardcore on Kara Smith Brown's LinkedIn, which I'm sure you get in your inbox all the time. And we went really aggressive into all things intent data, all the things we're learning, our process, our point of view, right? So I am less macroeconomics related and my thought leadership, and more like really specific in the tactics of go to market for supply chain. And I have lots of points of view on that, and we like wrote a book on it. So that's usually the way that we do it. We say, okay, you need to have a human inside the business who is market specific. So when things happen, we have a human that can reply to those things from an economic perspective. And then you have a human internally who is really specific on the tactics. Like, what is the best way to do this? What is the tactical execution of whatever you're doing? And then we just post to LinkedIn all the time. We do bylines a lot, very specifically in the supply chain press, trade show speaking engagements, right? Getting folks everywhere we can. Wall Street Journal, New York Times, et cetera. We do a lot of newsjacking. One of the benefits of being super, super niche is that we can consolidate, right? So we have 36-ish customers in supply chain only, which means that when the news reaches out to us, we have many people they can talk to that are inside of our client base. So which is just another reason that we went super tight in the niche.
Why do you think some companies struggle to invest in thought leadership and it's like a challenge for them to want to put money or resources behind it?
I don't know. I really my true thought is that people general this is like super generalization, are afraid to be wrong. And we've got kind of two flavors of executives. We physically hands-on keyboard for some execs. And there's kind of two flavors. One is, sure, write whatever you want. It's great. The other is, this isn't my voice. I use double spaces after periods or whatever. I don't know, like no emojis. Like this whole like ego-centric, like it doesn't sound like me. And it's like, no, like we remind people all the time on LinkedIn, less than 1% of your followers will see what you post. 2, almost no one reads it. No one cares about you, right? And 3, like perfection is the enemy of progress. If you don't like it, you can change it, you can take it down. So I think a lot of what gets in humans' way is just that they're not confident enough to just put it out there, right? The best posts I've ever written were the most controversial, right? I wrote a post a couple of weeks ago on the pink tax, which has nothing to do with go to market and has nothing to do with what I do for a living, but I was just kind of irritated that I had to go sit at the nail salon. No joke. I was like pissed that like the guys because it went viral. I was like, of all the posts I've ever posted, like this is the one. All the guys that work for me go to like Supercuts. I don't know, maybe it was Supercuts, but like, 20-minute haircuts. And I'm in the salon for like 4 hours with like hair and makeup and nails and Botox and all this. And I was just kind of like venting on LinkedIn and it just blew up. So you never know, right? And a lot of people are just not willing to kind of just like put the silly stuff out there. And I think there's a line, right? I think there's some people that kind of go a little too personal. Like, I don't need to know about, some things in your life. But like, I think people kind of find the balance. But most of the time when people tell us no, it's because they're afraid of looking stupid or being wrong.
We need more people who are willing to share their honest opinions on the
Yeah.
internet.
Especially like smart leaders of multi-billion-dollar companies. Like, there's a guy in our space, his name is Jeff Silver, and he is incredible, right? He's had multiple exits. He's a billionaire, probably twice or 3 times over. I have no idea. But like, He has 2 sons that are just incredible human beings, and one of them runs a podcast, and he had his dad on the podcast. So Andrew Silver had Jeff Silver on, and the wisdom that this man dropped in an hour was like a master class. And now Jeff Silver does not have to post to LinkedIn, right? Like he's done, he's amazing, he's, doing what he needs to do, but he doesn't have to do that to be known, right? But if you're on your way up, like if you're like trying to make it, like just commenting on that, like being like, "Hey, I listened to the podcast. Like this is so cool, love it." And I think some people miss the opportunity to share what they're learning and how they're learning it. And maybe I have a weird perspective because I'm like a weird like learner. Like I like go to college like extra. Like I go to school all the time and do extra stuff. But I think if you're always learning, then you always have something to share. And maybe people think that they don't have anything to share. I don't know.
So, one of the things that you did was write a book because you had a lot to share. So, what influenced that decision, and what would you tell other people who are considering it to think about before going down that path?
So, the book basically came directly out of listening to the Two Bobs podcast, which is a very specific podcast by Blair Enns and David C. Baker about how to run and successfully exit and do all the things with an expert firm. So they came out of like advertising, two brilliant guys, and they basically said, give it all away. Give it all away, all the IP, all the knowledge, give it all away. And when they come back, they will be pre-qualified. And I had been posting and posting and posting, and then I went to Harvard for this executive ed thing, and I learned about frameworks and how Harvard at everything, every case study at Harvard ended up with a new framework in it. So cool. And so I was like, okay, so I have a framework. I had to build it for the clients that we already had. I had to have a point of view on stuff. And I had to teach the team what our point of view was. So I was kind of forced into that, which was great. It's a good exercise. And then I had to put it all in a document. So then I had this big like framework document. This is pre-ChatGPT, by the way. I literally typed it out like old school. And then I had a couple guys that worked for me that was like, we think you're brilliant and you should write a book. And I thought it was a little egotistical to do it. And then they were like, no, you really should. And so we did. And when I was writing it, someone said to me like, why write supply chain for go-to-market and supply chain sounds terrible. And I said, one day someone will, someone at one of the big companies, right? Some like C.H. Robinson or, one of the big guys will say like, hey, we should hire this woman. And someone will say, why? And they'll drop the book and they'll say, because she wrote the book on it. And then it happened, Stephanie. It has actually happened. Yeah. So one of the big companies in our space reached out. They were like, we read the book. Our CEO loves it. We want to hire you. Let's do it. And so it's done exactly what we want it to do. It's been an absolute labor. The second half of your question was kind of book writing in general. Do not recommend. I give it 0 stars. Did not enjoy. But I worked with Forbes. Advantage Media is the kind of book publishing arm. Adam Whitty is the CEO there. They did a great job. I will feedback for anyone thinking about a book is the framework is the most important. Like you have to have a very clear framework because that is what people are going to take away is the top line framework. Sangram Vadre from GTM Partners wrote our intro, which is great. And then Manoj from Sales Intel helped me write a chapter, and other folks from my team, Crawford and Will and Courtney. And then the most important person that you can get is actually the editor. So the ghostwriter is important because you need to get these like ideas out. And there's 3 funny stories in the book. And there's a story about how I trapped my husband into marrying me. And like, it's hilarious. And I had to have someone help me translate the way that I tell stories into the written word. But the editor is the most important. And then the decision to tape your own audiobook is also a big one. So I did my own. It's 6.5 hours of this Chicago accent. I don't know why anyone would listen to it. But people have, and they've given really good feedback. So that's great. And then lastly, I think is just really knowing what you're going to do with it from a marketing perspective. Sangram gave me really good advice on like really make sure you know what you're going to do with it. Launch day is really important. Get out in front of people, right? And the supply chain community has been just so kind to me. They've really been great. And so people are posting LinkedIn posts of it and they're sharing their thoughts. And I'm still waiting for the one person who hates it. They haven't shown up yet, but I'm sure it'll happen one day.
So, last question, what is your biggest go-to-market confession?
I think my probably the biggest confession is I didn't think the book would work. I didn't have a lot of confidence around the book. I was more anxious, and by the time we were kind of done with it, like ready to be done with it, if I'm super honest. Um, and I am so proud of it. Um, but also like now when I read through it and I look at, I'm like, oh man, like I want to change all these things, right? So, people joke about, maybe there's another book, and I'm like, there is no other book in me for sure. It's not happening again, but maybe there's a cleaned up version somewhere. So we'll see. Yeah. But I didn't love it. And I'm glad I did it, but I don't think I'd do it again.
You've been listening to GTM Confessions. If you love what you've heard, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. And don't forget to tell a friend.